fans, welcome back to the 6-year Stint NBA podcast. I'm your co-host, Sean Tomesi. Let's talk about the Lakers. This team has been really impressive coming out of the gate. 5-4 record overall so far, over 9 games. Bit of a home stay, bit of a road trip. Lot to take away from this team, as they've kind of impressed a lot of people coming out after winning only 17 games in the 2015-16 season. Everyone knows about the Kobe campaign, the Kobe last farewell, Coach Byron Scott kind of ignoring his younger players in prioritizing the farewell tour of one of the greatest players of all time, and Kobe Bryant. Now we have a new coach, new system, new outlook, new goal in mind with this team. Obviously, wins is not the priority, but it seems like this team's already off to getting way more wins than last season, even though player development is more their goal right now. So they've won almost 30% of the games they won last season through the first 9 games. So, hopefully they can keep that up and achieve a plus 500 record by the end of the year. But I'm not sure that's going to be the case. Maybe they'll probably cool down a bit. But this team's been really exciting. They won their home opener against the Houston Rockets 120-114. And they kind of just blew people blew people's minds with that performance, and then as a young team would, they went off and lost 3 in a row after that. Granted, they were on a road trip, and their schedule has not been kind to them. I mean, they started off with a 4-game road trip after that opening home game against Houston. They went to Utah, Oklahoma City, and Indiana, lost all 3 of those games in a row, and then they actually won in Atlanta in high fashion, scoring 123 points. So this team has had some ups and downs. I mean, typically they're carrying a lot of the same tendencies that most young teams possess, and so therefore their problems seem even less so, because they all seem fixable, and it really does seem like this team is going to be one of the scarier teams in the league in a lot less time than we all assumed. This team right now, I mean, let me read you their numbers as a team. I mean, they're 6th in points off turnovers with 19 a game, and they're ranked 10th in fast break points with 15 a game, and they're 3rd in pace. So these are all really positive notes for the Lakers. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with Coach Walton. Last year, the pace was unbelievably slow. Kobe Bryant basically playing iso ball, Nick Young hoisting up shots with half a second left on the shot clock. Roy Hibbert, obviously a slower player now. All those kind of players were really slowing down their pace. Now they are 3rd in pace in the entire NBA. That is incredible, and that is a big thanks to Coach Walton, who, won a tremendous amount of games with the Warriors as head coach last year for half the season, while Steve Kerr was out with a back injury. So, I mean, it just goes to show that Luke Walton, that was no fluke last year. I mean, going from having probably the easiest team to coach in the NBA, being the most talented Warriors last season, to having a young team that's had personality issues, that's been through a lot of negativity in the past 2 years, and just kind of bringing a whole new mentality, a whole new style of play, and obviously it's been successful. Some of the negative things that obviously have come along, though, that I think are more to do with just the fact that they're so young and that they're inexperienced and whatnot. They are the second worst when it comes to allowing opponents points off of turnovers. So they're sixth in scoring on turnovers with 19 a game, but they're allowing 21 points per game from their opponents on turnovers. So they're not holding on to the ball enough. Julius Randle has been struggling with turnovers as well. He obviously talked about this in interviews and said that it's something he's going to have to work on. And he's such a tough guy. So are a lot of these players. Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance Jr. There's a lot of tough bodies on this team, and those guys. There's a really good work ethic culture in this organization already, and it's really a good thing. But another negative for this team, they're fifth in opponents' second chance points. So they're obviously defensively not as good as they'd like to be. They have a lot of players that can play defense. They have a coach who stresses defense. I mean, we're not talking about Mike D'Antoni here. Luke Walton definitely comes from a background where defense was important, and he certainly stresses that. And he has the team of players to do so, but it's just not really clicking yet. Probably because they're focusing a lot as well on their offense, and maybe some players are a little bit carried away with that, and they're not focusing enough on their defense. They're average at most categories, or bad or poor in defensive rankings. And back to turnovers, they're just not really holding on to the ball. They are second worst with their assist to turnover ratio. But to be fair, if you look at who's number one, who's the worst team at assist to turnover ratio, it's the Denver Nuggets, who haven't been too bad otherwise. But it seems to me that assist to turnover ratio is not a category that does too well with young backcourts, especially when both of your starting point guard and shooting guard are no more than 3 or 4 years removed from the NCAA. So, Emmanuel Mudiay, Gary Harris, Jamal Murray in Denver, obviously that's going to be a lot of turnovers, even if they're great players. They're young. It's just going to happen. And the same case in Los Angeles. You've got D'Angelo Russell, Jordan Clarkson, Brandon Ingram. I mean, there's obviously going to be a lot of turnovers there. Nick Young. Even Lou Williams. I mean, that's not going to be a huge shocker to most people, but that's something they should work on. And being second worst in the league is not really acceptable. That's something, if they want to win and be taken seriously, they're going to have to improve on those numbers, because assist to turnover ratio has a very close link to efficiently and consistently winning games. And that's obviously a problem that they've had, is they don't win games consistently. After winning against some really good teams, sometimes they'll just lose to teams that they should be beating, like Dallas. They should have won against Dallas. I mean, Julius Randle had 6 turnovers in that game. That was a big part of it. Just securing the ball and really coming out every night and not just getting carried away with, oh, well, this is a team that we're not supposed to beat. So, it's really we need to put all our energy into beating this team so that we can be, this can be like a morale win. That's all good and fair, but if you're just going to use up all of your energy on these types of wins, you're not going to win a lot of games, which is fine. I mean, it depends what Coach Luke Walton and the organization really want from this team. I mean, do we want a nice record that we can actually build off of? Do we want to be in a position to potentially make the 8th seed? I mean, maybe even better. It doesn't look like there's a lot of competition right now in the West. A lot of teams are disappointing coming out of the gate, so maybe they can be a playoff team, or maybe they can just focus on really getting things right. And even if we lose a game, if you're shooting a high percentage and you're playing the right way, maybe that's more important than actually just winning at all costs at this point in time, when this team's obviously not ready to really contend, even if they have players that down the line will certainly be a part of a championship puzzle. in my opinion. Maybe it's time to kind of stress more of the fundamentals and not so much the results. That's probably the direction that they're going for. What they've done so far throughout 9 games kind of indicates towards that. Um, Thursday night, they had a really good win against the Sacramento Kings. In Sacramento. So that was a great win. Boogie Cousins and Julius Randle getting into a bit of a scuffle. Funny how two Kentucky players, former Kentucky players, don't get along too well. Obviously, that's just two guys that really want to bang down in the paint. Um, getting a little too much physicality over there. But I liked that the team's kind of the Lakers sort of stood up for Randall. Coach Walton, by the way, I mean, for as much as he knows about basketball and for as much as he learned while being an assistant in Golden State and even a head coach for a bit, there's really no comparison when it comes to having a coach who can actually play with your guys in practice. I mean, Coach Walton playing one-on-one, and we've seen a lot of these one-on-one videos of Lakers after practice. They always play one-on-one with each other regardless of position. And Coach Walton has not been shy when it comes to joining in on the fun. So he actually played some defense against Julius Randle in the post and drew a nice foul, flopping, as Walton learned to do very well with his career in the NBA as a player. So it's really cool that he can actually get in there and sort of show these guys. I mean, no disrespect to, like a coach Popovich or George Karl or one of these guys, but these older guys can't really step in there and do that. And sometimes it's kind of just, you got to get in there and really show these guys, especially when they're young players. They maybe learn a little bit more from example than theory. So that's a great plus to have. Also, the fact that he's a young guy and he was never really a star in the NBA. So in order for him to kind of fit in, and also the fact that his father was such a transcendent Hall of Famer, Luke kind of had to prove himself in a different way, and when he wasn't able to do that on the floor, um, he did a really good job, more than most players who end up having more of a bench role, of kind of facilitating himself as a locker room guy and kind of being a fun-loving guy that lighthearted, can joke around and creating a bit of a fraternity kind of culture within a locker room that I think so many teams don't stress enough. And obviously, you can't force guys to be friendly with each other. It's just not human nature. But what you can do as an organization is take notes. What are the character traits of your players? What are the character traits of your coaching staff? The guys that are in the board meetings, the guys that are here. What are their tendencies? What are these people like? And then you go out and you find out what are the kind of people that outside of this place that we can bring in that are going to fit in here. And that's, I think, surprisingly what the Lakers have done, despite the fact that in the last few years, chemistry and togetherness has not seemed to be a point of emphasis at all. I mean, to put it lightly, they haven't given a shit about team chemistry. So it's good to see that that's happened. And these players, all these young players, have done a great job of accepting Coach Walton and showing him some respect. I mean, it's hard not to respect a guy who won so many games with the Warriors. After a lot of people thought maybe that season would just kind of be a waste, and there was a lot of pressure on him, he came through and he's done it again. So Walton, really impressive stuff. And one thing that's really interesting about this team is everyone talks about how it's so young. Well, they have actually a large amount of 30-year-olds. I think 6 or 7 30-year-olds on this roster. So about half the roster is really guys that are trying to just kind of not necessarily get their paychecks and walk, but these are guys that are focused on sort of putting a product on the floor right now, and they don't really have the luxury of saying, oh well, okay, I might have only shot 20% from the field last night, but I have a tremendous amount of potential, and I'm going to grow off that. Let's talk about how I can improve. Brandon Ingram is allowed to do that. Okay, Timothy Mozgov, Lou Williams, and Nick Young are not allowed to do that. They're all in their 30s. So that is sort of a nice mix, actually, because you don't have too many young guys like a Philadelphia or a Denver or a Phoenix where it's like, okay, we're going to live and we're going to die by our young players, and we're just going to go as far as they're going to go. In this case, late game situations, you got a close game. Nick Young, say what you want about Nick Young, but he can be a very effective player down the stretch. And Lou Williams, one of the most clutch players in the NBA. Timofey Mozgov, who's obviously, won a championship. He is a veteran big man who knows a thing or two. He is overpaid. Let's not, lose our minds here, but he knows how to play. And then Luol Deng, I mean, you've got some smart guys here. I'm not sure why they haven't used Jose Calderon more. Maybe that's just giving him a little bit more rest, waiting until the rest of the season to kind of bring him in more. But you've got a lot of good players here who can kind of come in and pick up the pieces when the young guys are having young guy problems. So it's not overwhelmingly a youth movement here. You've got your franchise cornerstones. Don't get me wrong. It's not like with certain other teams like maybe the Knicks, where you've got Porzingis and you really want to stress the fact that he is your future, but you've still got guys like Carmelo, and now you've even got guys like Courtney Lee, Derrick Rose, and Joakim Noah, who are kind of stifling the growth of these players, not so much in a way that Kobe Bryant did last season, but more in a way where it's kind of awkward and you don't actually know what direction you want to go in. So in this case with the Lakers, it's very clear that all of the veteran players are expendable, okay? And that doesn't need to be a negative thing, because these guys have all played on multiple teams. They're no strangers to being traded or not being re-signed. And these are guys that, because they are respected around the league for being quality veterans, they won't have a hard time finding work elsewhere on different teams when the Lakers don't need them anymore. So it's really good that there's kind of there's nobody's tripping on this roster. Everybody knows their place, knows their role, and it's very, very clear, and everyone knows we're not dancing around the fact that D'Angelo Russell, Jordan Clarkson, Julius Randle, Brandon Ingram, and Larry Nance Jr. are the cornerstones to this team, and we need to focus on those guys. They're the ones that matter. Everyone else is just here to help those guys move along. And I really, looking at the rest of the NBA, there's not a lot of rosters I'm more happy with, to be honest with you. There's not a lot I would change with these Lakers. One thing I actually really was thinking about was I really hope that this trend kind of keeps going even into future seasons, because it seems like when you have something like this, it feels a lot like, the Oklahoma City Thunder, circa 2012, 2011, when they, or maybe before because this team's not playoff ready yet, but it feels like that. And if you have something like James Harden going to Houston, or you have something like, with the Warriors bringing in Kevin Durant and kind of sending away Harrison Barnes and Andrew Bogut and all these players that you need, it kind of disrupts things. And I'm not ready to say that the Warriors are a failed experiment. I mean, that would be unbelievably premature, but and they haven't even been that bad. But it does feel like it's an unnatural kind of quick fix. Not quick fix. That's the wrong term. It's hard to say, but I feel like listeners, you guys kind of get what I'm saying. It's just it's an artificial kind of feel. It's not an organic come up together. There's guys like to be around other guys that they kind of were together with at the bottom of the bench when they first started. I feel like D'Angelo Russell and Jordan Clarkson are a good backcourt because the two of them came up, uh, you know, being shadowed by Kobe Bryant and his sort of farewell tour, and they both kind of bonded, I'm sure, and Julius Randle as well. All the three of those guys bonded, I'm sure, over the fact that this is ridiculous. Why are we wasting our time here with this guy? I mean, Kobe Bryant is Kobe Bryant, but why are we being ignored? And now I feel like there's this fight and there's this fire between them, and they kind of look after each other on the floor. And you really see that whenever there's any kind of conflict with other teams, because they're the first ones to jump, and they're right there for each other. Even Brandon Ingram the other night, you know, I don't think anybody stands more of a chance of losing a fist fight than Brandon Ingram. I mean, the guy looks like he's made out of feathers, but he was right there in Boogie Cousins' area when Julius Randle was in a bit of a scuffle. So, I mean, if Brandon Ingram has the balls to get up and kind of stand up for you, then that really means a lot to me if I'm on the Lakers, and I really like that. So there's just so many good things to take away, and probably the biggest thing, I mean, I've kind of overlooked here is they've just been fun to watch. They've been so much fun to watch. Jordan Clarkson, every time he gets the ball, he just kind of makes something happen, and he needs to work a little bit more on facilitating. But I guess he's kind of assuming that he's not going to be the point guard. That's Russell's role, so he's kind of, I guess, not focusing so much on his assists because he only has 2 a game. But I think he's kind of a magic man when it comes to having the ball. That's not a comparison to Magic Johnson, but just it's so fun to watch him. He's got such a high energy, and so does Randall. I mean, not a lot of guys are banging down low as much as he is. He's really a physical player, and playing only 28 minutes a game, but still, tallying up 8 rebounds a game, and he's very, very physical down low, despite being a bit undersized. He's a great player if you want to have a small lineup to have at the 4 or the 5. But even in a regular lineup, I mean, he's a true 4. He's a true power forward. And if he just keeps working on his mid-range shot, I don't think he needs to be a great three-point shooter because the rest of the team's got potential there. Even if there's no finished product right now, they're not a great three-point shooting team. Very low percentages throughout the board. And the best shooter on this team right now is Lou Williams at 40%, and that even that is probably going to decline a little bit as the season wears on. So not a great shooting team, but a lot of guys that have the form, have the capability. It's just kind of getting that repetition in, getting that reputation in as a three-point shooter so that you can get those touches and sort of work with that. I really like when they have Larry Nance on the floor. I think 20 minutes a game is not enough for that guy. He's dealt with a little bit of some injuries, but I think he's such a great player. It's so good to have him out there. I think we need more players in the league like Larry Nance Jr. We really do. I think every team should have a Larry Nance Jr. People talk a lot about Draymond Green and Kent Bazemore, Will Barton, players like that. Well, Larry Nance is kind of like that, but he can be a 5, and that is so beneficial to your team. I mean, if you have energy from your big men, I think that affects the whole team because guards really feed off of big men's energy. I find in the NBA, and especially because so many big men get kind of bored out there. They get kind of slow. I mean, look at guys like Roy Hibbert. I mean, nobody's more boring than Roy Hibbert out there. I'm sure D'Angelo Russell's so much more excited to be feeding Julius Randle and Larry Nance and Tarek Black in the post than Roy Hibbert. I'm sure he's having a lot more fun with that. Now, let's talk a little bit about Brandon Ingram here. He hasn't gotten off to a great start. He hasn't played much either. I think being one of the most raw players in the league right now, and everyone kind of knew that even on draft night. This guy wasn't going to be the same as Ben Simmons, who seemed a little bit more ready to go. I think it's a process with him, and I think I was very concerned at the beginning of the year. How is this team going to use Brandon Ingram? Because it's a bit odd. D'Angelo Russell's only been there for a year, but it already kind of feels like it's his team. And Jordan Clarkson is sort of the Klay Thompson of this team, not in style of play, but more just kind of role and fit. And then Julius Randle is by no means just a role player here. He is certainly a star going forward, and I could see him being an all-star in the next few years. So you've kind of established that, and it just kind of felt like, okay, what's Brandon Ingram going to do? Because I think a lot of people thought Brandon Ingram is, maybe not right away, but eventually is supposed to be like a 25 points per game scorer. So how would that really work with guys like Russell, who shows a tremendous amount of will to score, and all these other guys who certainly can score in the high teens once their game is kind of been more equipped. So it felt a little bit weird. Now I kind of make sense more of it because it feels like Randall is more of a scrappy player than I assumed at first. So maybe points are not going to be the number one thing for him. And then you look at Nick Young, who's the third leading scorer on this team, behind Lou Williams and D'Angelo Russell. So a lot of trade rumors have involved Nick Young over the last few years, and a lot of people will find this to be surprising, but Nick Young is the longest tenured Laker on this team currently. So it's funny that he's the one being rumored in trades, but I think it's inevitable, and he is going to be traded eventually, or once his contract is up, he'll just walk. But I like that the Lakers are not sort of just shrinking his role just because they might not necessarily need him anymore. Again, as I said at the beginning of the show, winning results are not exactly the key focus of this organization at this very moment in time. So putting up, sort of inflated stat sheet numbers that don't really mean anything and don't really affect the game, like Nick Young scoring 15 points per game, and maybe that's not gonna lead to a lot of wins. But what it does is it kind of it gives the other players a real reason as to why they're not the ones scoring, if that makes any sense. So Brandon Ingram doesn't have a problem with scoring 6 points per game because Nick Young is throwing up those points. If Nick Young isn't there, and guys like Tarek Black and Marcelo Huertas and Calderon are forced to score, which is not a natural role for those kind of guys. Guys like Julius Randle, guys like Jordan Clarkson, guys like Brandon Ingram are going to be frustrated because they're going to say, well, why am I not getting these touches? Why the hell are we getting Jose Calderon to shoot 18%? Obviously, he's not that bad at it, but that's a bit of an exaggeration. But why are we getting Jose Calderon to shoot so poorly? I guarantee you I can shoot a little bit better than that. Give me the ball. Well, right now what they're doing instead is giving Nick Young those numbers. But as soon as Nick Young leaves this team, which is 100% going to happen, Nick Young's not going to retire a Laker. Once that actually happens, there's going to be that void there. And whether that's 2 more points per game for 5 players, or whether it's just one player kind of taking over, it's going to be spread out somehow, and it's going to be way more beneficial for the team because you're going to have a very apparent improvement from right now to whenever Nick Young leaves. So that does so much for morale because I'm sure guys are aware to the fact that the Lakers are doing this with Nick Young, but nevertheless, walking in one day and being able to score 20 points instead of being limited to 10 is going to hype guys up, whoever it is. And whoever that player is going to be kind of given more of a star role, which is what I believe every team should have. And I'm not an advocate for teams like the Denver Nuggets who just think that it's okay to have a bunch of mediocre players. No, it doesn't matter how good your bench is, doesn't matter how good your entire team is. You're going to have go-to guys, especially on the offensive end. So you need that, and that's something that I think they're doing a great job of stressing. So all in all, guys, I'm just really impressed with this Lakers team. They've been incredibly fun to watch. They have a fast pace of play. Despite the not so impressive numbers, they do play defense. The problem is they're not consistent with it, and that's why their numbers, their team ratings are not so great. Their net rating is pretty average because of the fact that their offensive rating is average and their defensive rating is average. So they're not really, bringing out a polished product. But what they're doing is building in pretty much the perfect way. I can't really name one other team right now off top that is doing a better job of rebuilding, doing a more healthy job. And in a city of like Los Angeles where the clock is always ticking, and, if you haven't won a championship in 5 years, people start to ask questions, which doesn't happen anywhere else. So it's good that they're kind of shutting up the crowd and just saying, look, this is what we're going to do. You either buy in or you don't. And it seems like they've done it in a way that's actually entertaining at the same time, unlike the Philadelphia 76ers. So fans have been able to buy in. And the Lakers are doing a pretty good job of actually stealing some California fans from the Golden State Warriors and from the Clippers, so which is something that I never would have thought they'd do. So, I mean, I couldn't be more impressed. Could not have any more condolences for the Los Angeles Lakers, for Luke Walton, and for the rest of that team. Very impressed. I hope they keep it going forward. And, I don't really think it's a big deal if they make the playoffs. There's certainly going to be a team that embraces that underdog mentality, and I really feel sorry for anybody who has to play them in the first round. But, I don't think that the playoffs are really the direction they need to go in yet. I'm sure that team would benefit from it if they did, but right now I think it's more important to kind of just get the fundamentals right and make sure that these guys can stay consistent, because you need to be able to. One of the most important challenges with coaching a young team is being able to translate that potential and that promise and that eagerness and being able to polish it and sort of render it into something that is consistent and reliable. The key difference would be, having a team like the Spurs that what you get every single night from them, versus, teams that have guys like, I don't know, maybe the New York Knicks right now, who sort of struggle, or maybe the Toronto Raptors. Those guys, DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry, they came from, Kyle coming from a number of different teams, never really had a stable organization, never really had a great coaching staff. I still don't think the Raptors have a great coaching staff. Therefore, they don't have consistency. They're not consistent. And you see it when it comes to playoff time, and you even see it in the regular season. They can't hold on to significant stretches. So turning that promise, that young momentum into something that is sustainable and can last you a generation is going to be the biggest challenge for Luke Walton, and certainly with guys like D'Angelo Russell, who do have some personality issues, but they are obviously open to working on them, and that's probably the most important step. So thanks for listening, guys. Make sure that you tune into the 6-Year Stint NBA podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, or whatever media outlet you use to download and listen to podcasts. Obviously, this podcast is free. You've probably already clued into that if you've made it this far into the episode. So make sure that you share it with your friends, share it with the NBA world, so that we can get more viewership and more people talking to us, so we can give you guys the best coverage possible for the NBA season and everything going on with that. Make sure that you follow us on Twitter. We're always tweeting. I have really been trying to kind of promote our show through Twitter. It's been a struggle. We just got Vine, and pretty much a week after we installed our Vine account and started posting some videos for you guys, it was announced that Twitter was going to shut down Vine because they owned them now or something like that. I didn't really look into it that much. Point being, Vine is going to shut down, so that sucks. Just heard that SoundCloud was going to start charging users for content, which I don't really understand because the publishers are not making any money. I don't make any money on this podcast. Why are users being charged? It makes no sense. Maybe I'm not getting all the details on that, but I think that's stupid. We're obviously going to have to find different ways to stream our podcast. Don't be worried, guys. We will do that. There's always going to be ways for you to listen to this show. And make sure that you guys, contact us. Let us know if you want to be on the show. We're always looking for guests. We've had quite a few guests. I think we're close to about 10 guests now. It's been a lot of fun having people on the show, bringing in different perspectives, and hopefully we can continue to cover the league and have some fun doing it in the process. So thanks for listening, guys. Until next time, my name's Sean Temesi. Thanks for listening to the 6-Year Stint NBA podcast.